what also happened that didn't make the headlines so much was the power abuse that was kind of uncovered. And that actually, hundreds, if not thousands of people felt that. And so it wasn't a bigger problem, especially for those women that were impacted, but it was a problem nonetheless. And there was this culture of power abuse. Like, I'll just give you one example. Excellence has always been a really high core value for Willow Creek. And I actually believe excellence is a good value. Excellence honors God and inspires people was the phrase that we used. But that value had been turned into or redefined as perfection.
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I'm so glad you're here, and make sure you subscribe. We drop all our episodes here, and you'll never miss an episode. And today's conversation is with Tim Stevens. He is the former executive pastor at Willow Creek Church, and we talk about all the abuse and the dynamics of power there, and basically how to create a healthier church. Speaking of that, I'd love for you to check out the Art of Leadership Academy. Do you know so many people struggle with how to lead a church? Maybe you feel like you're always playing catch up, or like you're perpetually behind, or that you have an impossible job description. Well, I've seen thousands of leaders now gain clarity and confidence in their leadership by joining the Art of Leadership Academy. We've got all of my training courses in there, plus an incredible community. Check it out. You can join now at theartofleadershipacademy.com. And also check out church.tech. If you've ever wondered how you can actually make your message stick in the hearts and minds of the people you serve, what if you could do small group guides, social media posts, discussion starters, and a whole lot more with the press of one button? That's what church.tech enables. Check it out at church.tech and use a promo code Carey and tell them that we sent you. And now, here is my conversation with Tim Stevens. Tim, it's good to have you back on the podcast. You're one of the OGs, man, like the first 100 episodes.
I could not remember when that was, but
I could not remember. I knew you were on. I don't know. It might have been like episode 15 or something like that. So
yeah, back in the early days.
Back when we were young. Remember that? Oh, that was great. Yep. That was 9 years ago. That's a long time.
Yeah.
But it's great to have you back.
Thank you. We're really glad to be here.
You've had quite a journey. You've gone from Granger Church to Willow Creek with a stint at Vanderbloemen. Now you're off on your own these days, doing more of your leading smart. Can you share how each of those journeys, because I think that's not atypical for leaders to go from place to place to place.
Yeah.
How that shaped your leadership journey and some of the highlights / crises that maybe propelled you from one to the other?
Yeah, no, I'd love to talk about that. So I was actually, prior to Granger, was working at a nonprofit for 9 years. And so right out of high school, and just got to kind of flex my leadership legs, and I had people pouring into me and just giving me opportunities. And so that was really cool. So when I went to Granger, and it was this little startup church in a theater, never at one, on both sides, one side would be like, never thought I would ever leave there. On the other side, didn't even imagine what it would be like being at a place for 20 years. And so what's cool that when you're at a place for a long time is you're raising kids with the people that you're serving. You're going through life with them. You're watching babies get born. You're helping people get married. You're helping bury loved ones. And so there's a significant meaning in that in church leadership that I don't know that you get in every part of leadership life. That just brings a great fulfillment and significance. I think also at that stint at Granger, 20 years, every day waking up to like new challenges. We were 200 people meeting in a movie theater when I got there. We were 6,000 when I left. And so every day we're all looking at each other like, okay, we've never been here before. Like, what do we do? Like, we just have to kind of make it up as you
You're
go.
describing my day. Okay.
Ask a lot of questions.
Like,
that's right.
Yeah, I'm on with my team. It's like, yeah, we haven't done this before. We don't know what we're doing. Yeah.
It's so true. And yet we had, in an unlikely place, in the bedroom community outside of South Bend, Indiana, had this like superstar team of leaders that were really high level. And so you went to work every day working with people that were fantastic at what they did.
Well, there were many. I mean, you and Tony Morgan were sort of the dynamic duo at the executive level. I remember that. You were both working there at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, Tony and I just spent the weekend at the Clemson Notre Dame game. This is in November, and had a fantastic time. So
awesome. So then you went after Granger. Where did that take you next?
So I spent in 2014. We moved to Houston. As we were leaving Granger, and it was a great leave. A year-long conversation with my senior pastor about what was next for me, and him blessing me as we journeyed out. I knew if I was going to change jobs, we were a small community, I'd probably need to move. It would mean a move, and if it meant a move, I had determined I was not going to live in the winter. I was going to stop shoveling the weather. So,
well, and we're talking to you from Chicago today, so that turned out well.
Didn't work out so well.
Yeah.
But I joined up with the team at Vanderbloemen, and got for 6 years a chance to just pour into churches all across the country and nonprofits and other organizations, and really help them unlock people problems, succession issues, staff culture, finding the next right person for their team. And so, man, learned a ton about just the church overall, kind of the Big C church, and just the leadership challenges, some unique, some very similar at various places.
Okay, and then Willow answered the big call.
Yeah, so I was working with Vanderbloemen and was helping Willow Creek with the senior pastor search. And so most of your listeners probably know the story of it. Went through a devastating series of events in summer of 2018. So this is now into the summer of 2019, and they bring us on to help them with the senior pastor search. And over the next 6-7 months, just going back and forth, flying back from Chicago to Houston, spending time with their elders, really trying to, first discern who they were looking for and then begin to look for that person. And so it was fascinating just what was happening in my heart during that season. Cause like probably you and a lot of the listeners, like Willow had impacted me for decades in a significant way, and impacted, I don't know if there's any way to quantify it, but arguably one of the most influential churches in the world from the 90s, for the next 30 years or so. And so it was, and for me personally, I've been over to Willow hundreds of times. And so to be able to work with them in a time of like deep crisis, it was just a very humbling experience. And my heart grew towards this group of 8 elders who had been thrown into the deep end in a really difficult time, and just got a chance to kind of walk alongside them. And it was interesting as that season went on, we would find some like really like leaders that we felt like were at least had the qualifications and the ability to be able to step into a role like that. And over and over again, we hear, no, not the right time. No, don't want to do it. Why would I want to run into that fire? Those kinds of things. And my heart was like, someone's got to help like this church that had helped so many. And so towards the end of that time, I remember before they had settled on Dave Dummett, who eventually became the senior pastor, they were still in that decision process. And I just remember flying back to Houston and just going on a walk with my wife and saying, like, something's going on inside my heart for these people. And she said, "You're not going back to work at a local church, are you?" I said, No. That's not what I'm saying. Just like something's going on inside my heart. And a month later, after Dave accepted the position, he calls me the next day and says, "Hey, let's do this together. I'm going to need an executive pastor to help kind of rebuild this thing." And so it's the most spontaneous decision I've ever made. And yet God had already like prepped my heart for that decision, even though I didn't know that question would be coming. And so this was in the lockdown of COVID. So we're 3 weeks into COVID when this call comes, and 8 days later I said yes and moved up to Chicago.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know whether we can talk about this, and if not, I'll cut it out. But you and I had a conversation at one point in 2019, I think, about, hey, is this something you would consider, heading to Willow? And I prayed about it a lot. So did my wife. But it was one of those things. I've benefited so much from so much of the material, and obviously horrified by the findings that were unveiled as well. It was just devastating. But I didn't feel anything like any kind of pull other than, hey, you're supposed to keep doing what you're doing, which is really interesting. But the thought of it was like completely intimidating. It's like, oh my gosh. And I mean, if you've been in Willow, you see what a megaplex it is and the devastation left in the wake of, Hybel's resignation and so on and so forth. And to try to reconstruct it would have been quite the challenge. So I got to ask you, why did you run into the fire? I mean, other than the prompting in your heart, why on earth would you sign up for a challenge like that?
I mean, great question that I've been asked a lot of times. Because it wasn't a fire. It was like everything was on fire, when we got there. But so, a few things to know. One is like, because I'd walked with the elders for 6 or 8 months during the search, they told us everything. So they kind of like uncovered every rock because they wanted the next senior pastor to not be surprised.
Right.
And so it wasn't that I was running into a fire I didn't know about. Like I knew what kind of the world knew, but I also knew a lot of other stuff as well. And so, but it's the only way to define it is a call. And it's kind of, when I was at Vanderbilt and I was walking, hundreds and hundreds of leaders through their call, honestly, I was a bit skeptical about that phrase call or calling, because I'd never experienced it. Like I'd only made 3 job shifts before Willow, and they'd all been the logical next right step for me or my family, where this was not at all.
Yeah, this isn't part of a career path, right?
No. And so it was just a sense of like, I could not explain it. And it helped me understand the people who had told me in the past that they'd had a calling. But for me, it was like just a sense of, I'm supposed to do this.
Wow.
And so we moved to Chicago.
So you said it wasn't a fire. There were multiple things on fire. What was on fire when you got there? Yeah.
So a lot of your listeners will know the story, but all of the elders had resigned en masse in 2018. The 2 lead pastors who had taken over after Hybels resigned they resigned as well. And then every other executive leader, save one, who was the CFO, also either stepped down or were in the process of stepping down when we got there. And so just this, like a leadership lobotomy almost, just a real vacuum of leadership at the highest level. By the time we got there, we were working with a new set of elders, but they've been thrown into the deep end. They loved Jesus. They loved Willow, and they were taking shots every day.
Was this the 3rd set of elders or the second?
This would be, we call them the stand in the gap elders now as we look back. So these were the elders that, the first set of elders that were brought on in January of 2019 after kind of everything fell apart.
Yeah. Okay.
In 2018.
Okay. Yeah.
And they were all still there. And in fact, the last of them just rotated off. So none of them are elders now, but they led strong through a really, really difficult season. But we had, the congregation that was there, it was interesting when we got there. I bet 80-90% of the ones that we talked to were hopeful and were looking forward to the future. Because the people that were devastated, broken, and there was, thousands of those, they mostly weren't there by the time we got there in summer 2020. So the people that were still there were at least curious, a lot of them hopeful, a lot of them saying, let's move forward. The staff, on the other hand, felt like 80% just broken, and they've been carrying the weight. Again, most of their executive leaders had left. So these leaders had been carrying the weight of just getting through Sunday to Sunday to Sunday, taking the blows from the media and the bloggers and just trying to just do what they could. And so there was, some were broken, some were exhausted. I had one guy say to me soon after I was there, he said, "Tim, you and Dave are coming in and you got fresh legs and you're saying, let's go run a marathon." And he said, "Tim, I just ran 3 marathons back to back and I can't run around the block again."
Wow.
And so he wanted to, but he just couldn't. And so there was a fair bit of that. And then there were people that were just evil, that really wanted Willow to fail. And I think because we were locked down and it was COVID, that they just couldn't leave if they wanted to. And so, and because we were kind of locked down behind screens and we couldn't really meet staff those first 4 to 6 months, we didn't know who they were either. We knew forces were at work against us, but it was tough to figure out who they were.
Yeah, evil's a really big word. What do you mean by that?
Meaning wanted Willow to cease to exist. wanted Willow to
in the
go
sense
down.
that not only deal with the sins, not only deal with the problems, but like you don't deserve to live.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go that far, but
no, not you personally. I meant the church organizationally.
Yes.
I didn't mean you, Tim. I meant the organization of Willow should cease to exist. Yeah,
I think there was a sense of like the huge leadership and trust fail, and so the institution failed us, and then there's a sense of large institutions are by and large wrong, evil, whatever word you want to use, they fail us because they got too big. And so there was a sense of like, this thing needs to go away because there's no way to redeem it.
Wow. And it's not an unplausible question. I mean, I'm not talking about malice here, but just like, has an organization gone beyond the point of redemption is a really big issue. You and I've had, because I've been there primarily through the Global Leadership Summit over the last few years, and really seen a shift in culture. That's palpable. Having been to Willow many times prior to the leadership transition and all the sadness of 2018, there was a very different culture. But having seen you and Dave and then Haley Bodine, sort of the executive office, just set the new tone for the team there, has been really encouraging. But I'd like to drill down a little bit on like what the problem was. So I think most people know what happened with Bill Hybels and the sexual predator, or whatever you want to call it, approach that he took of just, it's just devastating for an organization. But how would you, looking back on it now, exegete the cultural leadership power challenges that Willow was going through? In other words, what you had to undo / reverse / make new.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the things that made the headlines was the sex scandal.
Yeah.
And it can't be overstated how devastating that was for the lives of several people.
Yeah.
Many people.
Many.
However, and I don't want to, it's not a compare and contrast, but what also happened that didn't make the headlines so much was the power abuse that was kind of uncovered. And that actually, hundreds, if not thousands of people felt that. And so it wasn't a bigger problem, especially for those women that were impacted, but it was a problem nonetheless. And there was this culture of power abuse. Like, I'll just give you one example. Excellence has always been a really high core value for Willow Creek. And I actually believe excellence is a good value. Excellence honors God and inspires people was the phrase that we used. But that value had been turned into or redefined as perfection and used as a hammer. And so if things weren't at a level of perfection, not just bring your best, but bring perfection, then people would just be moved out of the way and replaced, or heads would roll. I don't think heads actually rolled, but that was kind of the sense that people got of you can't mess up. You can't make a mistake. And so that was just one example, kind of one tangible example that we would hear of power abuse. It was just amazing how we would, Dave would do something that was just, very loving and honoring and respectful as a human being. And people would be like, they'd be surprised by the level of either humility or the level of compassion or the level of, because that's just had not been their experience. And that wasn't true for all of Willow. That was just true for those that were kind of closest to the center.
When you say abuse of power, and I've been involved in a few conversations, when I've been there, let's break that down a little bit, because what I'm sensing you saying and what others have said is the sexual abuse was horrendous, but it was an offspring of a deeper challenge, which was how power, secrecy, the culture was wielded. Can you say a little bit more? And I'm not saying this to like go back 5 years, 6 years and look at everything that happened at Willow, but I mean, there are tens of thousands of people listening to this. And we all have power dynamics at work in our congregations, in our leadership. We have healthy aspects of that. We have very unhealthy aspects of that. So what were some of the things that you noticed that you think every church leader should be paying attention to?
I think a big takeaway for me, and I see it at other places besides just Willow's Past, and they don't all end in a devastating way, but is the isolation of the leader. And people talk about it as accountability, and I know accountability it doesn't work unless you want to be held accountable. But to me, it's like isolation is at the core of that more than accountability. It's when we and I think as a church grows, you take a few, and being at a church that grew significantly, you take a few arrows and you begin to isolate yourself, and you take a few more and you begin to step back and isolate yourself. And pretty soon, you have the exceptional thinking, meaning I'm the exception to whatever. It's like I'm asking people to be in small groups. I'm not going to be in a small group. I'm asking people to, give generously, to volunteer, to whatever. And we kind of step back. And so it was just fascinating to me talking to people that had been around for 35, 40 years at Willow, and just having never seen the pastor's wife, having never hung out. These are like senior level leaders. In any kind of significant relational way. And I think there was just an isolation thing that I don't think was always there as I talked to leaders who'd been around for a long time.
Back in the day, it was different.
It was different,
But somewhere along the way, that had changed. Do you want to talk about the physical reconfiguration of the senior pastor's office? One of the most interesting conversations I've had in the last few years has been about the dynamic that people felt in even approaching that space. So share as much as you're comfortable with, Tim.
Yeah, a quick example. So when Dave and I first got there, COVID shut down, so the building's completely empty. Dave and I are the only ones in this 900,000 square foot building for the first several weeks.
900,000 square feet. Don't let that go by. That's a big building. Wow.
It's a big building. Yeah. But there was a facility care manager, director that would be there on occasion. And there was a time when he came by, Dave and I were in his office brainstorming, and he came by and he wouldn't cross the threshold. Like he wouldn't. And it was like so strange. Like come in, it's like I've never been in the
threshold.
Office.
What do you mean? What threshold?
Well, just crossing, the door was open, but
the senior pastor's office?
Into the senior pastor's office, yeah. And so we did a lot of reconfiguring. There was 3 locked doors plus a card badge to get to the senior pastor's office. And I get it. Like 20, 30 years ago, there was some significant safety issues and threats and stuff. So when that building was designed, so I totally get where it came from. But we just kind of took the walls down, threw windows in, really opened the space up, purposely invite people into that space for meetings that could happen in someone else's office or somewhere else, but bring them in there. Dave doesn't even have a desk. He sits at a table, the table where we do all of our lead team meetings is where he sits. So very, just tried to like break down the walls, instead of having the sense of a C-suite, that you have a sense that like this space is open. We just started like leaving the doors open to the whole space so that people can come and go and not feel like there's a block between them and those that were at a different level.
And what was the response to that, particularly among veterans? Not new staff, they wouldn't know any different, but veterans. What was the response you saw to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just remember that guy's name is Brian. Just like I can come in, like it's okay to come in. Just a sense of that, a sense of like Dave often has staff, just various groups of staff over to his house for fire pit, for just pools, for whatever. And that's a new thing. It's just not a normal thing for Willow. Another thing that just really changes the involvement of spouses. So instead of Tim's the employee and my wife has nothing to do with it, it's like, no, Tim and Faith and your kids. Let's get to know your spouse and your kids. The first time Dave's wife Rachel came to staff meeting, and people call me like, "What's going on? Is this a co-pastor thing?" It's like, no, it's Rachel. She loves this church. She's just coming to staff meeting. So it was, it's just culturally a shift for people.
Yeah. What else would you say in terms of the fires you were facing in those first 24 months or so? What were you trying to tackle to change the culture?
Yeah, so staff was broken, and again, we're meeting via Zoom for a lot of our earliest conversations and meetings, and so we had things like one time a person on staff logged in under a pseudonym and then started kind of chat bombing Dave while he was giving a devotional and staff meeting, and thinking he wasn't, we wouldn't be able to figure out who he was using the Willow computer. It was pretty easy. We had, for the first 9 months I was there, up until the end of 2020, every single time we communicated anything of importance to the staff, it got leaked within 5 or 10 minutes to the bloggers that exist to, kind of shoot arrows at churches. So we would say something that was supposed to be semi-confidential or just wasn't public yet. And 10 minutes later, our whole congregation plus, would be hearing about it because they'd be reading these blogs. So things like that. And that was coming from our staff. We didn't know who, but it was coming from our staff. And it just communicated the level of brokenness that they were at. We had one of our first meetings as we were planning Dave's first his first sermon. So this is maybe early June 2020. And we met with that team for the first time to kind of do the planning. And they kind of laid down an ultimatum and said, hey, here's the 4 things you're going to say this weekend, Dave. And if you don't say it, we're not going to help you prep for the sermon. And we're out, basically. We're going to boycott the weekend. So, but it came from there's a whole story behind that, but it came from just a real level of hurt, of organizational trauma, of broken promises from the past. And we were kind of the recipients at that time, but it also just kind of showed the level of brokenness people were feeling.
You use that term a few times, level of brokenness. I mean, it's not an automatic go-to, Tim. I think a lot of people, particularly in the leaks, if all of a sudden, you say something and 10 minutes later, it's out on the blogosphere, on the internet, and people are reporting confidential things, it would be easy to make that person a target. Just, okay, today's your last day once you discover who that is. But you mentioned, I'm picking up an empathy for people who were hurt. How did you go about handling that? Because I think it's very easy to get defensive.
There's 2 sides of that. One side was just a deep, hurt people. Mm-hmm. And we were brought in to lead a staff of hurting people. Almost 500 when we got there. And so, and they didn't, for the most part, didn't cause the hurt. It wasn't their fault. So that was one side of it. The other side is just the practicality of, we have zero trust with this church or these people. So for us to come in and begin to pull the jobs of people that have been with them for 25 years would not have been a helpful thing to kind of helping the church survive and turn around. So we had to remind ourselves a lot, just tons of empathy, go the extra mile, err on the side of grace, realize where people are hurting. But also long term, we had to make some decisions so that wouldn't continue.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Leading when you start with zero trust. That's extremely hard. What did you do? What did you, Dave, and the team? And I met with your executive leadership team. I mean, you're not on staff anymore, but I mean, there's 12, 15 on the executive leadership team, some of whom are veterans, some of whom are new, like post 2019. What did you start to do that rebuilt trust? Because I'm thinking about other leaders who walk into a place. Like Willow's not the only one to have gone through some kind of massive breach of trust scandal, the whole deal, disappointment, heartbreak. Lots of leaders. I mean, Succession is picking up steam. They're walking in going, yeah, this place is burned to the ground and I gotta pick it up. How do you rebuild trust?
Yeah, we talked about that a ton, through the whole time, but especially in those early months. And honestly, there's not a lot you can do to build trust except to be trustworthy over and over and over again. And it just takes time. And I just remember us doing trustworthy things and people had such skeptical views of it. And it's cynical, of feeling like we're lying or it's self-motivated or whatever. And we just, it just was keep just doing trustworthy things over and over. Let's just keep following through on our word. So one real simple example would be, I did a few different culture assessments, like how are we doing as a staff? And then the legacy staff that had been there for a long time, they already came into it with a mistrust because it had been used in the past, kind of weaponized against them in some ways, or at least not followed through on, where people got singled out. And so, probably the easiest thing would have been like, okay, we just won't do any assessments, but we wanted to get a sense of where people were at in an anonymous way. But then we just like made ourselves like follow through, and actually, here's the 3 things that we heard from you that we actually need, that we do need to change, and we're going to change. And then 3 months later, hey, here, let's give you a report on the 3 things we said. And 6 months later, let's give you a report on the 3 things that we said 6 months ago that we're going to change, and just kind of just continue to like just prove ourselves trustworthy in doing what we said we would do and keeping our word. So that, I don't think there's a lot of rocket science to it. I think it's just it takes a lifetime to build trust. It takes a second to lose it. And so for us, it's just like we got to build. This is the long game, and we got to build trust over time.
Yeah. How did you deal? I remember there was so much scrutiny when you first got there because Willow had been in the headlines for a couple of years. I remember saying to Tony, man, if we ever took an assignment like this, it would be in the New York Times, not to mention every other thing. And we didn't feel calling to it. And I'm excited. I think Dave's done an incredible job. Your team has done an incredible job. But how did you deal with all of that scrutiny? The bloggers, the journalists, the people who, and many of them wanted Willow to fail. They wanted to, see it go under, because that can be a real distraction. I mean, I'm not against accountability and not against that at all, but like that can be a real distraction, to the task at hand. And often those stories, they have 0.1% of the information, and you're sitting there actually trying to lead it. So how did you deal with that kind of scrutiny?
It was really frustrating that first year and a half, because the first 6 months it was every single day.
Yeah.
Journalists, bloggers, so-called journalists, and. Initially, the stance was like, no comment, ignore it, let's just move forward. And when we did that for the most part, that's probably 80% of our approach. But there was also the sense like our people, our congregation is reading that stuff. Yeah. And if we don't correct the narrative, they believe what they hear. And so we had to comment, we had to engage in sometimes. So one of the first things I did probably a month into going there is I invited one of the most prolific bloggers against Willow to virtual coffee. We couldn't get together because of COVID, but just to listen to her story and to ask her questions and kind of seek to understand kind of conversation. And she softened up a bit after that. She still wrote an article or two. I wish she hadn't, but she softened up after that. She would more often after that call for comment or clarification before she ran something, whereas before she never did. So that kind of thing of just like, okay. And my thought on that going into that conversation too was hurt people. I'm guessing there's a story here. There's some reason why these articles are kind of taking this form of a approach. So, but honestly, it was very frustrating because you'd feel like you take a few steps and then someone just blasts you in the media or on a blog.
Yeah, that can be really hard. I can only imagine, Tim. So as somebody who visits once a year through the GLS as a rule, I notice real differences. And I said that to you and Dave and the team, and I mentioned it to some of the GLS people, like even in the volunteers, because the Global Leadership Summit is fueled by volunteers, and those are all Willow people for the most part, Tim. And I noticed the difference between 2019, 2021, 2022, 2023. There was at first a bit of a softening. You could feel the old culture, that kind of protection, that like nobody gets back here, where are your credentials, da-da-da-da-da, to a much warmer, gracious, almost happy. Like there was almost joy there this summer that I hadn't detected before, even in previous visits. And I think it was a big encouragement. How did you begin? When did you begin? How did you begin to see that turnaround in attitude? Because you can't control that. You can't control the parking team's heart and attitude, the greeter's heart and attitude. You really can't. So what happened there?
It was a significant and intentional focus on staff. Because I think the way you impact the people, the volunteers in the parking lot, are by having staff that's just enthused and excited and on task and on board with where we're going as a church. And so, it was almost like getting there as like the world's largest church plant. Like we got a lot of buildings and we got a lot of people. We don't know how many because we're shut down in COVID. But what do we do? Like, so what do you do when you start a church or start any organization? It's like, okay, why do we exist? And so we just got about like, let's figure that out and then let's get it out there. What's our vision for where we're going? What are some of the things that we value as an organization? What's that going to look like? How are we going to operate? What's our strategy going to be? So just trying to provide a ton of clarity, and also then focus on just the health of the staff. So we spent some time pretty quickly. We put together a culture team. And originally it was hard, like, okay, we don't have staff values, or at least none that have been talked about anytime recently. And we want to develop some staff values. But how do we do that? Okay, let's pull together a culture team. Well, who should be on the culture team? Well, let's pull together the people that we think embody the culture that we want to be, that we want to live out as a staff. And so pulled together 14 people, very diverse group from multiple campuses, both men and women, multiple ethnicities, multiple tenure. People have been around for 35 years on staff, and myself, who've been there a few months. And so that team just began to focus on, first just assessing, like, who are we and where are we at? So those first few months we spent just kind of like looking kind of internally, and getting a sense. And what was amazing to me, we didn't have a culture. We had a whole lot of cultures. So one person's experience was highly positive, even through the mess. And someone else's was like, their whole team was deeply traumatized. And so, figuring that out, and then what are we going to build, and how are we going to build this towards the future? But my philosophy or thought on that is, like, it comes from the staff. It doesn't matter if you have a staff of 6 or a staff of 500, like we did when we got there, but it comes from the staff, and it's all going to. And if you don't have it at the staff, there's no way you're going to get it with the volunteers. So yeah, that's where we started.
I think that's sound leadership. Now, the assumption would be that maybe you hit bottom during the vacancy in 2018, 2019, et cetera. That's not what happened. Things got worse before they got better, right? Can you describe that narrative? I imagine there are some listeners in that ditch right now. It's like, I've been here for 3 years and it hasn't turned around. Like, what was your experience at Willow?
Yeah, we went into it feeling like it's probably going to be. People had told us it's going to take 2 to 3 years to turn this around, or to turn a culture around. And we felt like it'd probably be 3 to 5 years because of the level that we were starting at. And so, but it was just about, like I mentioned earlier, just about like, let's just do the right things. Let's just do the right things over and over and over again. What was amazing to me was we were probably 2 years into it. It's probably early to mid 2022. Before there was any real sense that anything was working.
Wow.
Then it was like, it's working like over there. And then it's like, it's working over there. And it's like, it starts, and it's like, okay, we're starting to get a little bit of flywheel momentum with this thing, this thing is actually starting to appear healthy, even though we had to go through some tough things even after that as a staff. But to see the way that the staff recovered from those significant things really quickly and kind of came together in a unified way really quickly, just let us know that we'd made a ton of progress in that.
What were some do-overs? Like oh, we tried that, big mistake. Are there any, looking back on it, that you're like, yeah, that didn't help at all?
So I, at my core, I think part of my DNA is believe the best, and that's to a fault.
Yes.
So it caught me to a fault early that first year, for 6 months actually, with one of my leaders who I was just believing the best. And because of COVID shutdown, I couldn't get in proximity to see for myself, so I was just going to believe in the best. And I actually and that turned out spectacularly horrible. We lost 32 people at that campus out of 37 staff members that quit en masse. And we lost probably a couple thousand people at that campus. Which many we probably would have lost because of COVID. We don't know what we lost because of what. But anyway, significant greater hit at that campus than any other campus. And so it's like, man, I'd love a do-over on that. I would have asked a whole lot more questions.
What would you do differently? What would you do?
Yeah, I would have asked more questions. I would have, I had legacy leaders in my ears on two sides. One was like, that leader is wanting to do damage. And I had other leaders saying they just have never had a healthy leader speak into their life and their ear. And so you just need to really encourage. And so, I didn't know. So, but I would have asked a lot more questions. I would have figured out ways, even with the COVID lockdown, to get more proximate. Hindsight's great, but I would have wanted to be more proximate to their team, so I could see what was happening. Because it was, looking back on it, they'd been working towards starting a separate church about 6 months before we even got there. So that's information obviously we didn't have at the time. But I think probably asking more questions would be the big thing I should have done.
So here's a question not specifically directed to this situation you just talked about, but Henry Cloud, who I know you know and has been on this show numerous times, friend of the Global Leadership Summit, has, I think it's Boundaries for Leaders, I forget. But one of his things is there's three kinds of people in the world. Wise people, foolish people, and evil people. Wise people, obviously, you want more and more of them, and those are people who see the truth and correct themselves. Foolish people see the truth and they just keep stumbling along. They're always in debt. They're always in new relationships and breaking up. They make the same mistakes over and over again. But then there are evil people, and the difference between evil and foolish is evil people intend to harm you, foolish people don't. And I'm just wondering whether you have anything. First of all, feel free to play with those definitions. But secondly, do you have any thoughts on how to handle people that really intend to harm you?
Yeah, I think I read about that in his book, Necessary Endings. He's probably had.
Oh, that's it. It's Necessary Endings. Bingo, bingo. That's the one. That's the one.
Yeah,
such a good book.
Yeah, it might be in another book too. But
no, we'll link to it in the show notes. It's Necessary Endings. You're right.
Yeah, such a fantastic book.
Yeah.
I would say, I'll tell you how we got at it, but this is very unique and probably is not transferable to anyone else.
Well, we'll hear the story.
Because it was COVID. So two things: because it was COVID, anyone who was in that category and wanted to leave couldn't leave because of COVID, economy, whatever. It's a very early stage of COVID. Secondly, Willow's previous leaders had left Willow in a very financially sound place as far as we were bleeding money week to week, but we had a lot of money in the bank. So
you had reserves. Yeah.
We had reserves. So what we were able to do is offer an opt-out, and we offered it for all 495 people on staff that first fall, and just said, if you want to leave for any reason, like if you're hurt, if you're broken, if you just want to see your grandkids and they live somewhere else, then we'll have a financial care package for you. And so what that enabled people to kind of opt themselves out.
Self-select.
Self-select out. And again, at that point, we weren't sure who was in that bucket. As far as evil working against us, we knew some of them, but not all of them. But anyway, we 114, if I remember right, took us up on it that fall. And they were all gone by December 31st. I just remember, and some people we lost were amazing. Like people that's like, we wanted them to go the distance with us. So you lost some great people. So I don't want to categorize them as, but I do know, like January 1 of 2021, it was a palpable difference in staff meetings. Like there was just like a sense of people, they turned away money to stay. So they were at least hopeful, if not excited to be there.
Right.
And it felt hugely different. Now, I don't know how that's transferable to many organizations or churches, but for us, it kept us from being in the position of having to tell someone, who's been there 20 or 30 or 40 years, like, we no longer have a place for you.
Yeah. No, anything else from, fighting those fires to the turnaround that you think leaders should be paying attention to? Any lessons that are extractable?
Yeah, I think when we were working through our values process and really raising up those staff values, we've all probably, everyone who's listening, have been in an organization where staff values are an employee handbook or they're on a wall, and that's it. And so we really focused on like, how are we going to get those like embed? It's going to be in the air we breathe. And we figured it's going to take us 3 to 5 years to get there, but like, what do we do systematically to get this in the air that we breathe? And so that's been a huge focus. So we have 5 staff values that we focus on. We have 5 church values, and we kind of expect the staff to live up to all 10 of them. But we began to find ways just to drive those deep. So one way, and this won't sound profound, but like doing it over and over and over and over again drives it deep. So a value of the month. Every month there's a different value of the month. We take 15 or 20 minutes in a staff meeting that month, and we have someone tell a life story about that value, what that value means to them, how they live it out. And it's not one of the leaders. It's not me. It's not Dave. We've never done that. It's someone on staff that lives out that value. Every value has 4 behaviors attached to it, because I think the value is kind of a quippy, kind of, easy to remember, but not so measurable. Whereas the behaviors are more measurable. Each month, then also with that value of the month, we have a newsletter twice a month, and we have someone on staff just take their iPhone and just record a 2 or 3 minute talk about that value. We work that value of the month into our one-on-ones. So we use a software program called Leader, and in Leader, we will kind of embed 4 questions about that value for the month. And we'll ask the leaders of teams just one time this month, could you take 5 or 10 minutes in a staff meeting, just a regular staff meeting, and just ask one or more of those questions of your team? How are we doing with this value? What can we do better with this? Whatever. So just trying to like get it into the air that we breathe over and over and over. And then also screensavers and walls and all that's great, as long as you're doing it as well in other tangible ways. Another thing that I think is important, like takeaway, and I learned this from Jerry Hurley at Life Church. Jerry said, you don't hire people and train them on your values. You hire people that already embody the values. And so we worked questions and experiences into our hiring process so that we could vet for those values before anyone ever got on the team. And it's not perfect science by any means, but it's like, one of our values is commit to candor. We don't want to like meetings after the meetings, say what you're going to say and let's have a respectful conversation. So, how can we vet for that? How can we have experiences around that? How can we, when we're interviewing someone, get a sense of if they're committed to candor? Performance reviews are built around the values now. So trying to, in all different kind of, parts of the employee journey, really embedding the values as a filter for those.
I think it was about 20 years ago, you mentioned 900,000 square feet, that the new auditorium, the quote, new auditorium was built at Willow, something like 19 years. So 7,800 seats. It's incredible when you're in the room. Obviously, you could argue it was never quite full, but it's harder to fill now. What are your thoughts for people who are architecting new buildings, building new locations, et cetera? The tendency has definitely been to downsize churches, even churches that are growing rapidly. What are the thoughts when you inherit a legacy facility that's almost 1 million square feet? Advice for leaders.
Yeah, I mean, we knew when we got there, Dave said this a few different times, it's either going to be a boat anchor that's going to sink us, or we got to figure out how to leverage this tool. It has to be a tool. If you haven't built it, don't. So I'll start there. But if you've inherited it, then we're figuring, we use a term called missional spaces, and we just spend a ton of time with the staff focused on how do we shift our buildings. We have 7 locations and 5 of them that we own. How do we shift our buildings towards community focus, towards really benefiting and impacting our community in a way that they become missional spaces, they become a front door for people during the week that may not be interested in church at all, but there may be a time when they're in crisis or transition, when they're looking for a church, and they're going to think about the people that loved on them on Wednesday when they were there for whatever it is that you develop your building around. So we're figuring those out. When we came back from COVID, we didn't have a Saturday night service, which the church had tried for years to kill and just couldn't kill it, but COVID killed it.
COVID killed it? Good.
COVID killed it. But what that did is opens up Friday nights and Saturday nights for using a large community space, an auditorium, one of the largest auditoriums in the Chicago area, for events and concerts and things that we can both gain some revenue from, but also just like build teams around to love on people so well. And still, when people come to Willow for the first time, they start attending regularly. One of the top two things they'll list for what was their first interaction is a concert or an event.
Interesting. Can I drill down on that? Because this comes up in my Art of Leadership Academy. We were just having a conversation about that, Tim. And the question is, a lot of people do those midweek events, everything from AA in the basement to scouts and brownies to community concerts, community outreach events. But a lot of people have difficulty making a connection between that midweek event where the facility was used and Sunday morning and like life change. Any clues in that? Did it happen automatically? Were there any intentional things that you did to help bridge it a little bit more?
Yeah, and we're not there yet. We did a lot.
Yeah, but for it to show up on a welcome card, your newcomer survey, is significant. That's not automatic.
I think it is the intentionality of the people that are running that midweek event. And if they really think of it as a missional event, right. and if they're really part of, like, if they're Willow, you can let people use your church and whatever, and that's great for nonprofits or whatever. But for those events where it's like you're there, you have a team of people there that are there just to make it a great experience for them, regardless of why they're in the building, and to love on them really well through a spiritually intentional missional focus. To the degree that you can do that, is the degree I think that's the stickiness. That's what's going to bring them back.
If you're building again, for how many people now attend Willow these days?
Between 10 and 11,000.
10, 11,000. If you were designing it from the ground up, what size auditorium would you build?
So Chicago's a big area, and I think we would love to launch more campuses now, and we will definitely launch more campuses. But it'd be a whole lot easier if we didn't have as much real estate as we did. So I'd probably build them to seat no more than 1,500, in the 1,000 to 1,500 range. Run them through there 3 or 4 times, and then build another campus 20 minutes away when you have. So it's manageable, it's scalable, it's something that we can actually repeat. You can't repeat our broadcast campus. No. And nor should you. So I think that's and it's difficult too when the main broadcast campus is such a behemoth. Then everything's compared to that, and so if someone's going to our Huntley campus, they're like, "Well, it's 20 minutes further. I could just drive over to South Barrington and get the real experience." Versus if I was starting over, I would have them all look very, very, very similar.
Yeah. I guess very few churches are more synonymous with Boomer Church than Willow in its 45-year history. Almost 50 years. That's crazy, man. Almost 50-year history, right? But it started when boomers were young and kind of went through that. What are you learning now as the church has been rebuilt about millennials and Gen Z engaging in ministry? We're omitting our generation again, Tim, Gen X, but that's okay. What are you learning about engaging younger people? Because it's not all the boomers who are coming back.
No, in fact, the largest percentage of people that didn't come back after COVID, but still consider Willow their church, they attend online, the biggest percentage were the boomers.
Wow.
By far, they enjoy their sofas and they connect with us that way. 61% of our new attenders are Gen Z or millennials.
Wow.
So this past November was the first time in 12 years that the church started trending younger instead of trending older. So really cool things happening at Willow for the future, which is cool. 60% of the new folks, you didn't ask this, but 60% of the new folks are not white. They're multi-ethnic.
Oh, cool.
Which is fantastic as well as we're reaching our communities around us. So, but I think actually I don't remember the question.
Oh no, I was just saying, it's synonymous with Boomer Church. Yeah, what are you seeing now in terms of engaging the next generations?
Yeah, so I think boomers, I think appreciated top-down leadership. They appreciated kind of like and Willow was a high challenge. Like if the leader stood up and said, "Hey, we're going to charge that mountain," man, Willow would fall in line and charge that mountain because they believed it, and they'd seen the other mountains that had been surpassed, and they knew this was going to happen. Whereas I think younger generations, Dave Dummett as a leader is much more collaborative leader. He's like, let's get everyone in the room, and the best idea is going to surface versus walking into the room with the best idea. And I think Gen Z and millennials appreciate that. They appreciate the sense that they have a seat at the table, even if it's not a seat at the table. They have a sense that they're involved, and they have ownership in that. And I think that's true of millennials and Gen Z. Is just the missional cause. So they're not going to just send money to Willow because it's Willow. They have to. Their heart has to really connect with what it is that we're about, or what it is that money is going to go towards. And sometimes as boomer Gen X churches, we don't do so. We do well at the asking. We don't do so well at the why. Connecting the dots for younger generations.
Yeah. So you moved on from Willow. So tell us a little bit about that decision and then what you're up to now, Tim.
Yeah, transitioned this summer and had some conversations with Dave in May of last summer. And I just said, Dave, I walked into his office one day, or I invited him to my office, as I recall. And I said, Dave, I hope you say no, but I think you should say yes. I think you should eliminate my position. I think as we're trying to right-size our finances, we're a bit heavy at the top. And I think as we think of my position going away or being absorbed by some others, that helps us to simplify other areas and it'll help us save some money. So he's so pragmatic that I knew he would say yes. But it did take him about a week to get there before he's like, at first he just said, don't talk to anyone else about this because I don't think it's a good idea. But a few days later and a week later, we pulled others into it. And I transitioned off by the end of the summer. I had been planning, when I went to Willow, I told Dave, I'm not going to retire from Willow. My heart is to help with the turnaround. But ultimately and eventually I want to scale up what I've been doing on the side for years, which is leading smart, which is just helping churches solve problems, helping come alongside church leaders and helping them in things such as culture, helping them with culture, staff, organizational health, helping them with succession. For whatever reason, I'm drawn to board dysfunction. I'm helping a church right now with just working through dysfunction on their board and trying to help because dysfunctional boards drive off good pastors, and I hate to see that happen. So doing a lot of that stuff, coaching executive pastors and lead pastors, and doing it full time now.
Wow. Okay. What are the challenges you see facing the church ahead? When you look ahead and say, hey, in the next 5 years, global crises notwithstanding, who knows what's going to happen there? But, in day-to-day operations of the church, what are you seeing as some of the top challenges facing leaders today?
The thing I hear, I just came out of some gatherings with executive pastors from some medium-sized to large churches. And some things that I hear that are challenging, they're trying to figure out, and you've talked about that in your podcast several times, is hybrid. Like, what do we do with hybrid, especially in a church context? And, obviously not everyone can work from home, but what do you do with that? And how do you balance that? In the States anyway, like employment law is just like, it's strangling people. So you'll be in a performance improvement conversation with a staff person, and they'll say, I think this is power. I think you're abusing me. And so then you have to put that on hold for maybe months, for maybe a year or more, while you navigate their accusation, because there's just so much at stake legally for a church. And so it just makes it really complicated to lead. I think artificial intelligence, you've done a whole series on that recently, is a big thing that churches haven't figured out yet. How to navigate.
And seem to be opposed to. I mean, when you look at the data, churches are like, I don't think we should be using this. It's weird.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah. I think, social media, and this isn't a new thing, but it's just social media and bloggers and just, I think it seems to be maybe a new thing or newer thing, the growing number of bloggers that seem to exist to see you fail. It's probably not their heart, but it sure comes across that way. And so they'll pounce on any sense of crisis at your church or organization pretty quickly. And then the tail's wagging the dog and you got to trying to manage the communication around it is really complicated.
So I don't read those and I don't follow those people just because it's not what I choose to fill my brain with. I mean, obviously, if there's a breaking story, I'll have a quick look or something like that. But that's not what I filled my daily diet with. But Tim, you're an OG when it comes to blogging. I was reading you years before I launched my own blog. And I want to know, what do you think? Like, so much has changed in the last 20 years. And I had Brian Clark from Copy Blogger on this podcast a year and a half ago, and we talked about what's changed in blogging. I know it's not the internet of 2009 or 2012. I get it. But I mean, you still try to add value. What do you think for those who are, because I agree, a really quick way to build a platform is to tear other people down, to be the scandal maker. We have really tried to resist that here, and we've done okay. Like, I think it's possible to build a positive platform, not where, like, think about it. We just spent an hour navigating one of the hardest, worst crises to hit the church, but hopefully we did it in a way that wasn't destructive, but constructive, honest. Okay, what do we learn? Right? Like that I'm all for, but it's the sensational clickbait and this happened and this happened, the insider stories. So if you're trying to build a positive platform today, what advice do you have for young leaders? Because I think largely you've done that.
So I think one thing I don't think has changed is just consistency.
Yes.
I'll see people start a blog and they'll do it for 3 months or whatever. And then they're like, there's only 112 people reading it. And it's like, I know. But next month there'll be 118, and then there's going to be 140, and then pretty soon you're going to have 300 or 400. And this thing, so to me, it's just like the consistency of getting it out there. I kind of ceased blogging for about 6 years when I was towards the end of Vanderbilt and coming to Willow, just because my day job was all encompassing. But just started again this last summer, and so just getting out there just consistently. And my context and lens is just how can I add value to the people that what can I do to add value? Where if they never click on anything or ever have an interaction with me, they can take what I put and they can send it to someone, or they can share it with someone, or they can use it in their own kind of teaching or learning, and add value to them. And so I think those two things, like consistency and then adding value. And again, like for me, it's not about if I'm looking for clicks. You're right. Let's focus on the sensational. But for me, I just want a growing voice and a growing influence in people where I can add value.
Well, a long game's a slow game, but it's a good game. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, maybe you're going to grow a little bit slower, but it's going to be stable. It's going to be organic. And I think that'll be great. Any final thoughts for leaders as you look ahead into the future or look back on what has been?
A couple thoughts. One is I just think we're gone are the days in most places of the top-down leadership. And I think emerging is the humble, authentic, appropriately transparent, collaborative leader. And a collaborative leader, not meaning that it's group consensus or that they operate by whatever the crowd wants to do, but they collaborate, they listen really well. And I think we're seeing more and more and more of that. And you just said, the other thought I have is you just said something about the long game. And I think about that like from a personal level too. If I was talking to, last week I was with a group of young leaders that were hanging out at our house and doing some brainstorming. And so when I think of young leaders, these were all probably 20-somethings. I think, man, just play the long game in your life personally. Like live your life every day in light of the things you want said about you at your funeral. Make decisions every day in a way that just lives with integrity. Because if you want to get to the end with integrity, that takes like a daily living it with integrity.
You can screw it all up in one day. It's not hard.
Yeah.
We're all one decision away from seeing a very different future. That's really good advice. Tim, people are going to want to track with you. Where do they find you these days? And do you have anything for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So you can connect with me at leadingsmart.com, and there's ways to interact with me there. I've also set up a page, leadingsmart.com/Carey. And what I've done there is pull together a new ebook on culture, the things we were talking about today. So I've just kind of got, it's 25 or 30 pages of just kind of some articles around building a culture. And again, in a way that just you can take it and run with it and plug in some principles there and hopefully help you and your team. So
some of the lessons we covered today as well will be in that ebook.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. Tim, it's good to catch up with you publicly. I know we chat privately a lot, but it's great to be able to bring this conversation. I think we're all better for this. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.